Hi, everyone. My name's Jared Gordon. If we haven't met yet, you might have seen me from some of the previous live streams. I'm here on the team at TechTO. Spent about a decade as a venture capitalist, including as well a couple exits under my belt, and now working, to help build this community. And really excited to have today's conversation with Dileep Thazhmon, who is CEO and co-founder of Jeeves, one of our partners. You might have seen them in our newsletter, or you will be seeing them at our events kind of coming up over the next couple of weeks. We host founders and funding to kind of demystify the fundraising process and the relationship between investors and founders. And today, we have some really exciting conversations that we're going to dig into. Jeeves recently completed a fundraising round in some interesting environments, so we're going to get into depth about that, as well as talk a little bit about their growth. Just kind of before we start, some rules. If you haven't found it yet, there's a chat on the side of your screen. Go ahead, introduce yourself. Let us know where you're joining from. Maybe if there's anything you're looking to get or put out in the world, please feel free to include it there. There's also a Q&A tab you can use. So please go ahead and post your questions and keep the conversation going. Lastly, there's emojis that you can blast across the screen. It's like virtual applause. And please feel free to use it throughout the show to react to the conversation. After we kind of engage in the main event here with Dileep, we'll open up the networking to the community. So, feel free to stick around and meet some like-minded individuals. Lastly, if you're going to share anything on social, we would really appreciate using the hashtag TechTO. So just kind of quick history of our guest. He previously was co-founder and CEO of Jing, which was a 40 million ARR profitable startup, an investor at Voyager Capital, product at PayPal, and has also worked in the nonprofit sector. He's got an MBA from Stanford and an MS and BS in computer engineering from Drexel. Jeeves, which we'll talk about in a second, was a summer 2020 YC cohort company. And then in March, they announced an 180 million Series C at a 2.1 billion valuation. So, kind of talk about your rocket ship. This is definitely, one of those stories. So Dileep, thank you so much for your time. We're really excited to kind of have the conversation. Thanks again for joining us.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me on. And I'm excited to kind of chat through some of the topics you brought up.
And so, two questions to kind of get started was, would love to kind of get the founding story behind Jeeves. What motivated you to get into corporate expense management?
Yeah. So in my last company, we had offices in the US and Israel. And one of the things that we'd come up against was when you close your books at the end of the month, it was hard to get an idea of what your cash position was, mainly because you would have one corporate card for the US, one for Israel. You'd have another vendor for wire transfers. You'd have a third one for working capital loans. And this was just in 2 countries, right? And this is not unique to my last company. It's not unique to us. It's just the way kind of finances work. And so really a part of the genesis of Jeeves was if you were looking at building a global business bank / payment layer for companies across different geographies, how would you do it? And it would be different from what was being done today. And so that was kind of a big starting point of where, we started Jeeves out of. And to be candid, the market then kind of adjusted to where we are. COVID started, people became more globalized. The amount of capital that's international, meaning outside the US, is just exponentially larger than what it was 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. And so we've been sitting on these 2 massive waves where, we have a good product, but we also have luck or timing. And it's kind of like poker. You want to be good, but you also want to be lucky. And if you can be good and lucky, that's usually the best outcome.
Yeah. And so speaking of, being good, looking at your background, you've worked at not just in startups, but as well kind of nonprofits, large tech, small tech, non-tech organizations. So I was kind of curious, like, how did the lessons that you learned from all those varied types of organizations apply when you were choosing and designing, I guess, the culture that is Jeeves?
Yep. It's a really good question. I mean, I think culture is actually probably the hardest thing to build. It has to be a large part of it has to be organic. It really is a reflection of what the company values. And so if I look at kind of Jeeves, we really value being, what we call relentless, which is trying to figure out a way to do something that hasn't been done before. We also have this thing that we try to keep, which is just keeping egos low, and we call it no assholes, right? It's just everybody's kind of building towards one direction, and that's important. And I think people that are good, people that want to work on something, they like hard problems. Like hard problems are very satisfying because you're trying to do something that hasn't been done before. And so when I look at even my background and the different things I've worked on, I think the core components of how you build a team, how you build culture in an organization, that doesn't change, because even if you're working in a nonprofit, even if you're working in a large tech company or your own startup in a different space, there is a component where you have to inspire people to bring the best out of them, and that can't be forced, and that can't even be motivated extrinsically. Not to say that extrinsic motivation doesn't have value, it absolutely does, but it only goes so far. And when you want people to go that extra level, it has to be something they want to do and something that they value. And so nonprofits are a great example of this. Usually doesn't have high extrinsic motivation, but what you really kind of touch on is that intrinsic component of like doing something that's important to you. And my personal kind of rubrics is I look at kind of a really good career or a job is part of three components. You're either learning a lot. I don't know, you're working with Elon Musk or whoever else, and it's like, this is just great. Every day I come in, I'm learning a lot. There's a high extrinsic component. You're paid whatever number it is for you. It's enough. You'll come in, you'll make it work. And then the last one is you have intrinsic motivation. You're working with puppies, like whatever that box is, that's for you, and that it works for you. And if you have 2 out of 3, that's a great job. If you have 3 out of 3, you should never leave. Most people have 0 or 1. And so my goal when I look at building orgs and building companies is ideally to give at least the 2 out of 3, which is you're coming into work, you're getting at least these 2 strong components, and that usually is enough to get people to go that extra mile, which you usually can't get just from salary or bonus or equity or whatever other combinations extrinsic.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I guess, an additional question in a similar vein is, you'd previously been an investor and was just kind of, how did that inform the foundation of Jeeves? Was it, easier to identify a big market, or,
I do angel investing now myself as well. And usually I look for 2 things, which I think is important, independent of, you're investing or you're trying to start a company. It comes down to the 2 T's. It's team and TAM. You want to have a good team and you want to be in a large TAM, which is the market, because what's usually going to happen is you're going to have to pivot something, your business model, the way you charge for things, the products you offer, the geographies you work in, something's going to have to pivot. And so for that, you need a good team to take advantage of a big TAM. So that's what was one of my big takeaways, which is if you're looking to build something, find that good combination of like a large market where even if you don't hit it 100% and you need to pivot, you're still going to be taking a large component, and then find a good team to work with. And again, this is very separate from like finding intrinsic motivation, which is a given, because I think, people see the glamorous sides of startups, but it is a lot of work, and it's, long days, and you have to enjoy the building. You have to enjoy the process and not the outcome, because the outcome goes just as easily as it comes. And if you don't enjoy the building side, you're going to burn out.
So, turning to Jeeves, I guess it's like it's been described, or we describe it, and you guys do so well in your features on our Friday newsletters, is that it's an all-in-one corporate card and expense management platform for global startups. And I'm just kind of curious, like what does this really mean? And maybe if we'd love to learn a little more about the products that you kind of currently offer or planning.
So just kind of taking the use case of a company that's starting today, right? Let's say you're based in Toronto and you're running a business. You, just to keep your operations going, need access to multiple payment stacks and multiple sources of funds. So you need someone to give corporate cards. You need someone else to help you with e-transfer. You need someone else to help you with wires between, let's say, the US and Canada, someone else for working capital, and so on. So you're talking about 3-4 vendors just in one country. Now, let's say you have operations or some kind of touch point in the US, you have to replicate that in a different currency, USD versus Canadian dollars, right? So now you're managing 6 to 7 different vendors. So that's really the core problem that we're trying to solve. And what we do is we say, hey, you can come to us. We'll provide the underwriting, the capital you need in your local currency, Canadian dollars, pounds, USD, pesos, whatever it is that you need to operate, and the payment rails to use that capital on. So really, it's this idea of how do you build a full payment stack that's vertically integrated. We control that and then provide that in one box to the end user. So expense management, the corporate cards is one part of it, but that's not the whole box. And so if you take a step back, today we operate in 24 countries across 4 regions. So region 1 is Spanish-speaking LATAM, Mexico, Colombia, Chile, Peru. Region 2 is US, Canada. Region 3 is UK, Europe. And region 4, which we're launching in May, is Brazil. And we have 4 core products. The first one is a corporate card, which is about 45% of kind of the volume that we do. The second one is B2B transfers. So I think about anything that's a non-card payment, so ACH, e-transfer, Space, SEPA, etc. The third one is working capital loans, 30, 60, 90 days. And the last one is Jeeves Growth, which is our revenue financing product. And so the way we look at it is we want to build a bank type relationship with you as the end user, where you can come to us for 1, you can come to us for 4, but we want to be that partner that can grow with you, right? From when you start with 2 people to 200 to 2,000, right? And again, we are also a work in progress building in that direction, but that's the end goal that we're trying to get to.
I mean, I think it's interesting, especially kind of, these multi-currency components. And that's a pain point we live every day. I think most startups do. So it's.
Well, this is what I keep telling people, which is today we have operations with employees in about 10 countries, and we have local Jeeves entities in Canada, Mexico, Brazil, etc. And we use Jeeves, right? And I'm pretty sure our setup is definitely more complex than a normal startup in 2 countries or 3 countries. So, you're kind of eating your own dog food and seeing that it hopefully scales within your company, and then someone else can use it, and you're like, yeah, here's how we use it. We just did last month, and that's what we did. So
that's true. That's a great point. And so kind of getting into the fundraising history. So I guess the story kind of starts with YC in summer of 2020.
Sure. So we were in the YC batch it's kind of crazy. It was summer of 2020. So it was September 2020. So I don't know, 17 months ago. And we did a seed round right after that in October, raised about 5 million. We were actually off the record on YC. So you couldn't write about us. We specifically didn't want any press. And the way I was kind of looking at that is, the seed round's goal is to build an MVP that has demand. The press component when you launch is actually not that relevant, because it actually increases the bar when all you should be doing is iterating, putting a product out there, making sure you have users, getting feedback, putting a product out. That's it. Right? So we actually had no press until June 2nd of last year. So that was 10 months ago, 9 months ago. It seems like we're been everywhere, but like until that point we had no press on purpose. Like we just didn't want any real coverage until we were like, okay, this is ready, we can start launching this, right? And so we did a seed round for about 5 million in October, right after YC, and then in April, May of last year we closed our Series A with Andreessen Horowitz, and that was for 26 million. And we did our Series B with CRV in September for 57 million. That was the round. And we just closed our Series C with Tencent leading it, and GIC, Stanford, et cetera, in there for 180 million at 2.1 billion posts. And in between, we have grown just substantially larger in the last 10 months or so. So even from September through where we are in March, we have increased both the transaction volume about 10x, as well as the revenue about 8 to 9x. So, we're starting to talk about real numbers, not kind of going up from 10K to 20K. So again, it just means the bar is higher, as I keep telling all of my GMs, including, Will in Canada, that everyone just makes it harder because you're doing well. So it goes both ways, right? So hopefully it continues. Our goal is to build something that, really hopefully is a force of good and does some change in the countries that we operate in, and, is a sustainable business. We're not looking to be like a flash in the pan and kind of go from there.
And so, I mean, I read that you had 5 term sheets on the most recent round. I mean, was this a planned round, or was it preempted? Like,
you're always
fundraising.
You're always not fundraising. The best fundraising is when you're not fundraising. And I really, as an investor before, and as someone that's done this, now this is my second startup, investors are a little bit like kind of, when they can't get into a club, they want to get into the club, right? So there's a whole very strong FOMO component. I will say that works much easier when it's the seed Series A boxes, because you're selling a vision, right? You're selling, hey, I'm going to build this massive thing. It's going to be huge. Much harder to do when you're in the Series B, Series C, because you need numbers. And that is a distinct change from even last year, where it was like, oh, look at these cool graphs and it's going up and to the right. Give me, the round. It doesn't work like that for the Series C. So the Series C was a very thorough diligence cycle, from everything from revenue to margin to operating model to cash burn. I mean, just things obviously you check, but you don't check at that much detail in the A, just because you don't have that much data. I mean, how much data do you have for a 4-month operating company? You kind of have to see again your team and the TAM. But the C is not like that. So the sheets, we did have 5 term sheets. We obviously went with Tencent, given some of the international expansion we're looking to do as well. But even the diligence post the term sheet was much more thorough. And so what I've been kind of telling a lot of founders is, there is a lot of dry powder out there, meaning funds do have capital that they raised last year, that they raised the year before, that they need to deploy, but the bar is much higher and it is not as founder friendly as it used to be. Doesn't mean you can't raise, doesn't mean you can't get a good round and awesome partners, all of that stuff, but it's not kind of as like, let's see what's happening and like put some funds in and hope for the best. There are actual metrics that people look for, which I actually don't think is a bad thing. I think it actually is good for the market and it's more sustainable long-term, having that second layer of kind of checks and balances.
So, I mean, did you notice like a shift in mid-fundraise, kind of given that, for our audience, and not sure when people will be watching this, but, there was like a correction or drop in value of the publicly traded technology companies that kind of happened over the past, in early 2022.
Yeah. So I think people kind of had a sense that something was coming at the end of Q4, just because it was so exuberant that it was like a little, ridiculous. Like even from someone that benefits from it, it was just like a little crazy, right? And so, I think people knew that, and we knew that too. By the way, like again, like I keep pointing back to, we had easily 90% plus of our cash on hand when we raised the last round. So we were nowhere remotely close to, burn, runway, none of that thing. It was just an opportune time, and I was kind of sensing the market was turning a little bit. I don't think I knew it was turning this quickly, to be honest, but it was kind of there where we're like, okay, there's something kind of coming around the horizon. Obviously, with kind of the invasion in Europe and the war and all of that stuff doesn't help. So I do think it's going to be choppy the rest of this year personally, but I do think good businesses will sustain over time. In terms of your actual question of actual change in investor thesis or like their sentiment, absolutely. Like the folks that kind of started the cycle had very different feels towards the end of the cycle. And so this is why I keep coming back to why it's so important to get real partners when you're building a business. And again, it's all a function of like what you're getting to pick from. And so your number one goal is to like live to fight another day, like get to the next cycle, whatever it is, whether it's revenue, whether it's fundraising, whatever your metric is, like get to that point. So do, what you have to do to get there. But I think there's a lot of value in picking a real operating fund type partner, especially in the seed A round, because they make a big difference as your company grows. And now there's a lot of capital from different sources, but a lot of times that doesn't come with the second part of that, which is what investors should be doing, which is going to bat for you and, like really kind of helping in the early stages. Later on, like now, there's only so many funds that can actually like write the checks that we need for the next stage. So you kind of like box yourself in a box anyway. But in the seed series A, B, I think a lot of times people don't do that now. And I really, really tell founders this all the time, like pick one good operating fund that you can go to and be like, hey, I need help, because you're going to need it.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, like, to kind of compare your story to, I guess, what's coming out now about Fast and how they ran their round and, went to market with 1 month left of cash in the bank and all this kind of stuff. I mean, it just sounds like your team was a little bit more prepared, and I guess probably started much earlier. And I was just kind of curious. I mean, timelines, roughly, like how long did it go from we should do this to term sheet? And then I think people actually were quite curious. I mean, if you can give rough ideas of how long that due diligence period was.
So I think there's two ways to look at fundraising, right? So one is you run a structured process. You get to a point where you say, hey, I'm going to start today and I'm going to end on X date. And that's what you're pushing people towards. The other one is you're kind of like a little bit more under the radar, because you're like fundraising, but you're not fundraising, but like here are updates. And like the reality is good funds know how to read that. They know when you might be fundraising, when you might not be fundraising, based off of the updates you're giving them, right? So for us, we have had growth and we have had usage, which drives, like PMF obviously drives a lot of this. So it wasn't directly something where I'm like, hey, I'm looking to fundraise. It was more something where I had indication that funds were interested. And then I was like, okay, I want to run a quick process because I don't want to take the first one that comes out. Right. And so once I knew there was an indication of interest at a certain price that I was in range for what I was looking to do, then I ran a quick process, which was about 4 or 5 weeks. It was intense, just like everything else. But like, I prefer doing it in small, like short kind of periods, because you can kind of get to an outcome quickly. I think the mistake a lot of founders do is they drag it on. One thing you kind of have to remember is when you provide information, it's more valuable for the investor than for you. So when you provide information, you should control kind of what that information is doing for you, right? Like, so share the information. No one's saying not to do that, but like have something tied to it, right? I'm going to fundraise in 4 weeks. Here's my initial drop, and like I'm going to give you one more update, and then the fundraising is starting, right? Versus just continuous like cycle of like information out. And again, this is different early stages versus like B and C. I'm talking specifically about when you're a stage closer to like the C. I think that information has value, but I think you should also use that to your benefit, meaning use that to start a process if there's value in that. Our actual diligence, to answer your question, was long. It was about 2 months, and it was pretty intense. So, and again, I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's a really good thing. It makes me feel better knowing like they've actually gone through everything, and we feel great. But it is, you should be prepared for that. And like as a CEO, you still have to run the company, your day job, and then you have to go, do this, which is an absolute full-time job as well. So it is intense, but that's kind of what you sign up for a little bit. So again, I don't know if that's representative of everybody's cycle, but our cycle was somewhere close to about 60 days.
So, yeah, then I guess you mentioned that you kind of evaluated for two things, right? Like cash and conviction when like selecting an investor. So, I mean, it sounds like you had at least five to choose from. How did you evaluate? I mean, evaluating their cash is easy. How did you evaluate their conviction or willingness to support?
Yeah. So one of the things I do, which I think has been very useful, is I very distinctly talk to other founders. We've been lucky by design, which is every round I've taken founder checks. Even in this round, I took a check for 10K on a 180 million round, which people advise you not to do. But for me, it doesn't matter that much, meaning it's not the check. I can fill the round, but the value of a founder on board, I think is for me personally a big thing, because then I have a network I can plug into and be like, hey, I'm looking at this. What do you think? How have you looked at this before? And that has value as independent of 10K or 50K or whatever that number is. So for me specifically, I talk to founders and I ask them very, very clearly, like, what do they like on the board? What do they like once they join? Because people don't realize like board and dilution, once you give those away, you don't get it back. And sometimes you don't have control, meaning you don't have an ability to say yes or no, right? It goes in a direction. So you want a good partner. And so for me, really was checking very thoroughly with other founders of like, hey, what are they like, once they join? Like, are they someone you can go to with problems? Are they someone that, if you don't know what to do, they can help you like think through it and connect the dots, right? So the founder validation is very, very high for me. And we've been lucky all three rounds. We've had like really good folks join, but it's been intentional, meaning I've specifically gone and like tried to find these people that can help us like increase the chance of success. One of my mentors told me this before, but I really believe in it, both for hiring and for investors, is like, if you find someone that moves the needle, like pay for it, because it is a disproportionate change in the chance of success for your company, right? And so don't negotiate that. That's not where you negotiate. There are plenty of other things you negotiate, but if you find that and you feel that, like, go hard for them. And both our A and B, we had investors that wanted to do the deal. And then I had the second level, which is like I talked to founders and they were like, you should take them. They're great. They go to bat, right? And for me, that's important.
And so, thinking about, even this must apply at all your various rounds, like you're in a competitive space, right? There are other players that are tackling this market in different ways and approaches. I mean, did that at all concern you as you kind of went out to fundraise or talk with other investors? The knowledge that they probably had, maybe met with Brex or met with Ramp or were trying to get into the next round in either of those companies, or, 100 different companies that where your
the
information
reality is like, it's not as big of a thing as people think it is, because for us specifically, like we look at our infrastructure as the core product. Most companies try to compete on the credit side. Our big differentiator is we have an infrastructure layer that connects Canada, US, Brazil, Mexico, UK, Europe. Most companies don't have that, right? So the actual revenue numbers, like honestly, people have a rough idea. If you have a GTV number, I can probably tell you like within 10-15% what that company's revenue and ARR is. And you have comps. Every investor has comps. I've seen my competitors' comps. Like I know what they're, I'm sure they've seen mine, right? So it's not like as kind of thing as you think it, like would think it is. Good investors don't do that because their reputation is how they get deal flow. Bad investors do it, and there's not a lot you can really do about it. But that should not be the distinction of whether you survive or don't survive, because like this is you never through the deck. So it should be like that shouldn't be the reason. Like there should be nothing on there. Like no one, like our entire deck it was a big deck. It was like 30-40 pages, but like there was nothing infrastructure specific on there, like which is our actual secret sauce. Like that, you only saw that until like if I was doing a presentation and walking through, that's the only time you'd see that, because that is our actual product. Whereas the numbers, sure, the numbers already changed. I mean, you can look at the deck now; it doesn't tell you much because it's 5 months old.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, and tying that back to a point that you made earlier that I think is really important for our community is understanding, if you're sharing something, make sure you understand why you're
That's
sharing.
right.
Like, what is it you're trying to communicate, or
and assume
not
people
just
are going
because
to
it was
look
in
at
the
it.
template you borrowed from somebody else.
And assume people are going to look at it. And for us, like you brought up Brex and Ramp, we don't necessarily compete with them because they're in the US. Like for us, it's more the local competitors in each region. And the flip side is, I really believe this market is massive. It's just absolutely massive, meaning the amount of people that are spending is increasing. So the actual TAM is getting bigger, and 95% is legacy institutions. So we're all playing in that 5% box, but you can have more than 3 players in in a market and still like have enough like meat to go around. So I don't actually see it as a bad thing. I think like it sharpens people to compete better. I like competition, good competition, and I don't. Again, it doesn't worry me in that sense. It actually, I think, makes us better in some way. And I think the market's large enough to have multiple players, winners in different niches, and kind of go from there. And if you have a good company, I'm looking to build a lasting company, it'll either do it or it won't. And your competitor is not the reason you're going to fail.
Yeah, that's fair. And so, I mean, Dileep, just kind of one more question before we enter like the wrap up phase, or I guess 2 more, but your company's scaled in every way possible over the past 12 months, like geographically, products, number of customers, number of team members. I mean, was that intentional, or was that just because you hit product market fit? Would you do it the same way again?
That's a really good question. So 2 thoughts on there. One, I don't think we were expecting it to get this big this fast, right? I was expecting it to be big. I don't think I was expecting it to be this big, this quickly. Again, this is just a starting midpoint. We can still go one way, we can go the other way. There are many directions even from this point, right? So this is not an endpoint. But just to answer your question, I didn't think I was expecting it to get here this fast. I think there were 2 things that like we hit on. One, we were building this a little bit differently. And I remember when we started, my number 1 question I get from investors is, why don't you just do one country? And I'm like, that's the whole problem. Everybody does this one country at a time. And we're trying to build this across 20, 40, 60 countries differently. We have a different architecture. Ours is modular, reusable. It's just built differently. And that's by design. Now, you can look back and be like, 5 years from now, we made it or we didn't. And be like, maybe they shouldn't have done 40 countries. Fair point. But that was kind of what the thesis, which is like, you look at fintech, especially the space we're in, and you do it country by country. And my goal here was to build something that can scale across countries at the same time, right? So that's one. The second one is, like when you build companies, you just focus on like one key metric, one key next step, and you just like break it down to its most like core piece. Like what I'm trying to get at is, a lot of times people are like, oh, I got to build this company that lasts 10 years, 5 years, etc. And it's like, you'll be lucky if it lasts 1 year. So like, why don't we focus on getting through 1 month and then see where we are? And if we get to 5 years, awesome, you made it, right? But this idea that you have to build this like lasting company, and again, trust me, for me, I want to do that. I want to build a big company. I want to leave a legacy, but focus, right? The focus is the part I think people get kind of really confused. Where if I started last year, I'm like, next year at this point, we're going to have 174 people and like X amount of revenue. People will be like, you're nuts. Like, what are you talking about? But instead it's like, okay, this month, here's our target. Here's the 1 number. We need 2 more people. Like, let's just focus on that and then keep building. It's like taking steps. You just keep building on the last step. So that's worked so far. It gets harder, to be honest, the bigger you are, because you lose some of that beginning ability where like 1, 2, 3 people can push the whole company forward, and you need good processes. And that's something we're trying to get better at, which is just that jumping from like, okay, this worked from like 3 people pushing it to like, how do we have a repeatable process and still not become like stale and like just super, like process bogged down, right? So it's a little bit of an art there.
Yeah. I mean, it's incredibly impressive, and we're super excited to be partners with Jeeves. Just kind of as we wrap this up, if you are a member of the TechTO community, feel free to go to the perks channel in Slack, and you'll discover an exclusive offer from the team at Jeeves, to get started and learn more. But is there anywhere specific, if people want to join the company as a customer or employee, where they should start?
Yeah. So we have a careers page on the website. We are hiring, as you can imagine, pretty aggressively across regions. We also, are building other things that we haven't even like fully announced. And I really, if there's something that's interesting, I'd love to hear about it. Which is like, hey, here's how we can do this better, or here's what would make my life better. And like, that's the whole point of this. The whole point is to hopefully make it better so that you can focus on, your product and your company and not have to focus on how funds move and the finance, et cetera. That's our job, right? And so, feel free to even email me directly. I'm Dileep@tryjeeves.com. We have obviously a careers page. We'd love to have more people on Jeeves, but just the feedback, I think, is good to make the product better, which makes it better for everybody. And so hopefully that's a flywheel that we get better at.
Great. Yeah, and you'll see links in the chat shortly. We'll make sure to kind of paste them so you have access to them. I guess just kind of two questions. Is there one piece of fundraising advice you wish someone gave you kind of before this whole process started?
I think the one thing with investors is look for people with conviction. If they're not there, they're not going to get there. And you'll spend a lot of your cycles like, oh, if I do this and this and this, and like maybe they'll be like that. It's like you'll know pretty quickly, and like you can move on. Doesn't mean they can't come back in the next round or the round after that with a different level of conviction. But use your time wisely. Like your time is the most valuable resource. And so one thing that I've noticed, and it's been consistent right from the beginning, and I've just gotten better at like sensing it, is conviction. And if investors have conviction, they want to do the deal, you'll know. And if you don't know, they don't have it. So just keep moving, go to the next one. It's fine. We've had plenty of no's. I've had 2-3 funds right in the beginning that, could have owned 20% of Jeeves for about $3 million. And now they're like, oh, we should have done that deal. That's life, right? Like, but like the conviction is the conviction, right? So and there are people that took a bet for $1 million and that's worth a lot more now. And that's conviction. So all I'm trying to say is if you're a founder on the other side, just value the conviction part, because that is what will keep them in your corner, and you will know very quickly if you're having chats with them. If they have it, move in that direction. If they don't, be nice, say, hey, let's keep in touch, and I'm happy to stay in touch as the next round, and just keep moving to the next one.
And so unrelated to your kind of current business or space, is there any kind of problems you'd like to see founders solve now, or any markets as an angel investor you're particularly excited about?
I mean, there's so many. That's a big one. I actually think it's an incredible time to be building. I think even in the last 18-20 months, there's probably been more innovation and change in the last, 10 years. So like if I wasn't doing Jeeves, I'd be building another company. But like there's just so many different boxes that you can play in, touch on. You can build on things that have already been built, which you didn't have 10 years. Like Jeeves couldn't have existed 10 years ago because even the infrastructure that we plug into just wasn't there, right? So a lot of different spaces. I think fintech is very interesting. Obviously, all the stuff with crypto, I think, is very interesting. I think there's a whole thing about how do you provide plumbing for companies. I'm personally more in the B2B space, not the B2C, but like obviously, that's just my personal preference. But think about like the plumbing side, right? What do companies need in any specific vertical? And how do you make that easier? I mean, I have a bunch of stuff for me personally, but like that's something I think there's a value in. And big hard problems, because that is a moat. And the good thing with hard problems is you'll know very quickly if you can do it or not. And if you can, you're not wasting 3 years doing some easy problem and like not really solving it. And if you do, that's a moat. No one else can do it, or it'll take them a while to figure it out. So pick the hard problems, spend time on those. I think that has an incremental value for you as a founder, because again, it just is like disproportionately tied to like an outcome that's good for everybody.
I think that's great advice. And so just kind of in closing for everyone here, if you enjoyed the event or you learned something, love for you to share your experience. You can do it on LinkedIn or Twitter. And please, if you do, use the hashtag TechTO. If you're new to our community, or you're an early stage founder who wants to get more involved with TechTO, you can check out our membership program. We'll post the link in the chat. It includes kind of exclusive insider only events, access to our Slack community. It's currently 2,000 people strong. And as well, we're spinning up a whole bunch of really exciting insider programs, as well as our summer social series at Stack Marketplace starting in May. So we'll be outdoors and come gather with 500 plus of your colleagues, once a month for the next couple months till it gets cold out. Thank you so much for participating. Look forward to your feedback, and please do stick around for networking and the rest of the event. Thank you so much. And Dileep, really thank you for joining us. This has been,
of course, thanks so much for having me on, and look forward to keep supporting the community.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, well, actually, we good? We got it?